ties. Start severing the ties with the shit that holds you back and cement the truths that set you free.
If the fire inside you burns brighter than the fire around you, you will always survive.
So this too shall pass.
Yeah.
It's not permanent. This too shall pass.
And so you have the pen in your hand and you can write whatever script you want to write. So write it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. We're so glad that you've joined us again this week. Today, we're going to be talking about your relationship with your past, how to reset it and reclaim your story. Guys, let's face it. Most of us have a pretty complicated relationship with our past. The Facebook status, relationship status? It's complicated. I think that would apply for most of us when we think of that. And we actually recently just polled the Living Richly Nation, our Facebook group, and asked them to describe in one word what their relationship to their past was. And it was amazing, actually. A little disturbing that so many people chose the word haunting. Wow. Over 25% at the time. The poll is still running now. But so let me kind of start there. How would you describe your relationship to your past? And why is it so important that we reset our relationship with that period of our lives, as opposed to just put it behind us? Wendy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the first word that comes to mind is ownership. I think it's a lot easier to run away from stuff that we don't want to deal with. And so I think ownership for me is forefront. I think it's almost like grabbing the pen back from anyone who tried to write any aspect of my life. And for me, taking it back and saying, nope, this is my story. And this is how I'm going to write it. And I have permission to write it however I want.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's complicated, but it's also evolved. So, now how I don't get stuck in my past, whereas before I would often get, look back on things where, I failed or I didn't do a good job and I beat myself up and I would stay in there for so long. And now I feel like I can visit it. And I can come back to the present and I don't feel that I get stuck there. So my relationship with my past has changed so much and I'm expecting it's going to continue to evolve, as I continue to grow.
100%.
It's so interesting because it's hard to pinpoint one word. And I know that when you put that poll out, I first looked at it and I wanted to go empowerment. I thought, is it? And I thought about it, empowering is how I see my past. And it's probably because of some of the things that I've gone through. The darkest one, of course, is the death of a daughter. When I'm facing different situations today, when I'm looking at different things that I'm having to deal with, that's the measure. Is it as bad as that? Nope. Okay, good. I can go through this. And so there are lots of scripts and other stuff why I would use probably the word complicated as well, because there's lots of things about it that are not really resolved. But certainly when it comes to my past has been a source of strength for me in how I face situations today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I chose in the poll, you were allowed to choose more than one word. And I chose haunting and empowering. And I think you went back and forth, said most days it's empowering, sometimes it's haunting. And I think you said 90-10.
90-10, yeah.
And I'd say that's probably true for me too. Yeah. Like, ask me to describe my relationship to my past and my answer is depends on the day. It depends on what's happening.
Yeah.
And it depends on how I've been triggered, right? Certain things trigger me more than others. But it's so important for me when we think of why it's important to consider that and learn to reclaim the story, truly reclaim our story, is I think it's about mindfully choosing what we carry forward from our past into our present and into our future, as opposed to being unconsciously controlled and influences by shadow forces pulling strings from the background that you're unaware of, unconscious of. It's about mindfully choosing. I call it severing the ties of the things that hold you back and cementing the truths that light your heart on fire, right? Like it's really bringing forward all the best from your past into now and into the rest of your life.
Well, and a big part of that is taking control of your narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around it. So I love how you worded that.
It's so interesting how when you ask people about their past, there's a lot of people who will just, well, the past is the past, and I don't want to look at it. I don't want to face it. I don't want to think about it. It doesn't matter what the past is, and the past is what you make it to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love the language you're using there around taking control of it, reclaiming it, because it is absolutely the things we've gone through have shaped who we are today.
100%. It's like the old adage, right? You don't drive your car. If you looked in the rearview mirror all the time, you'd crash, right? Like it. But you do need to drive safely. You do need to refer to those rearview mirrors like regularly. And I think often, to your point, the extreme of not living in your past is we ignore it. Yeah. And I think then we are unconsciously carrying forward things that are influencing us. We're not mindfully choosing. And we talk so much on the show about choosing instead of coasting, deciding instead of drifting. And I think it's so true here. I'm really excited about this conversation because it's going to be one of several. We started it with the launch of the 15-day challenge, which covers actually in the larger quadrant model that we've discussed, right? That's actually like quadrant number 2, the 15-day challenge. This is actually going back a step to quadrant number 1, which we call reclaiming your story. And to me, it's really about, I think it's certainly not an exhaustive way to carry that forward, but I think it's a powerful, simple 4-step way, looking at 4 dimensions of your life, of your past to help reset it. It starts by looking at who have been the key influencers in your life. We hear a lot about influencers and social media. These days, that term has become very popular, but we've had people in our lives that have shaped our story in a pretty significant fashion. It's about getting clear about the lessons that we have learned through some of the hardest things that we've gone through and what beliefs we have formed as a result of that. And then it's what strengths have emerged, right? Like the shit that you go through makes you stronger. You know, what's the saying? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, what are some of the signature strengths that your past has left you with that you might be more deliberate about leaning into? And then finally, it's what are the scripts, the beliefs that you need to let go of? What are the false narratives, the false stories that you need to shed so that you can really live more in the present and embrace a better tomorrow? So let's start with key influencers, right? Like the people that have really influenced you in a significant way. Talk to us. Let's talk about like how those people do shape our narrative and why acknowledging that is so important to reclaiming our story.
Oh, well, that's me.
Yeah.
Rob just,
Rob just told you.
I was about to answer it, and then I saw your eyes light up, and I went,
"You go."
All right.
No,
She wants to shape us. Shape us.
Oh, there's so much pressure.
Yeah.
No, I think I've talked about this on the show before where, people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I think subconsciously the people who surround you and influence you, you're not always consciously choosing who those people are. Those people are subconsciously being attracted to you, I think, by what you're putting out. And how many times in your life, as you go through a period of growth, do the people around you, those people who influence you, change. And that's that ever-changing relationship with influencers. I think there's some people that you have influencers for a lifetime. For me, I know there's some, and then there's others that have come in for a reason or they've come in for a season, and that's it. So I think sometimes we don't even know that we're attracting certain people into our bubble just based off where we're at on our journey.
And when you think about it, you think of those key influencers, whether they've been with us for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. Often when we get present to the influence they've had or the deposit they've made in our life is only when they're gone. Right. When they're no longer
Too
there.
often.
Or perhaps it's at a memorial service or where we're forced, we kind of come to terms with that. But I think mining it, getting clear on what are the deposits that they've left can be so powerful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if I think of a reflective mirror, it ties in so well to what you just said, Kate, because people around us can reflect their perceptions onto us. And it's what we choose to allow in and what's going to serve us. But acknowledging that allows us to adjust our narratives when they need to be adjusted and allows us to take from whatever experience or whatever person is in our life what we need from it at that time.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think those influencers can be both positive and negative, right? When I first read and preparing for our show today, and kind of looking at the conversation we were going to have, I was thinking you were asking about who are those influencers, not what are some of the things that they learn. And my first thought was,
well, I'm asking both.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. And it's like, well, my mom's because I always talk about how my mom's this great, this hero of mine and everything like that. But I realized, and this penny only dropped in the last, I'm probably about 24 hours into settling in on this. And it's kind of one of these, for me, it's a boom, right? Kind of a thing. And so I still have to process it. So I'm processing it live on the show right now. We're doing this live
good.
right now.
Right?
My dad. And my dad was somebody, of course, and I've shared it in my story. My dad was not a part of my life. And in fact, the first time I met my dad that I can recall, I met him before this, but first memory I have of my dad is sitting in a visitor room at Millhaven Maximum Security Prison. The first quality time I spent with my dad was in a trailer visit at a medium security prison, Collins Bay. He had just transferred from Millhaven from the maximum security to medium security, and I spent a weekend in a trailer doing a visit with him. The amount of times in the most unique moments where I go back to the memories of the conversations that I had with him at that point, and how those conversations have influenced and shaped so much of how I process information. The way he was an intellect, he was an incredibly smart individual, all of this stuff, and I often find myself saying things that were originally I heard during those first couple of days with him. So here's somebody who, and then that was it. And then I had a few more visits with him, some letters and stuff like that. And then he comes out of prison and disappears. And next time I see him, he's in the morgue.
Wow.
So it wasn't like so obviously he had a tremendous influence in my life. He didn't have a direct impact in those conversations, except for that one weekend visit in Collins Bay. And yet I'm realizing more and more the last 24 hours, I've been like, holy shit, so much of what I think about life, I go back to conversations and statements that he made during those few days.
Well, the reality is, I mean, all the research for the last 50, 60 years has been so clear on how when you're young, that your first formation, your family of origin, how that is so it shapes the way that you see yourself and you see the world. So I'm not surprised to hear that. And I love that you brought up the fact that not all mentors or influencers are positive. I mean, Luke Skywalker had his Darth Vader, and that's what shaped him to become who he was. We all will have a Darth Vader or two in our story that are not people we're aspiring to be like, but they help us define what we don't want to be like. And even that is very positive because it helps to shape our values and our view of the world. And so when Darth Vaders appear, none of us, we don't wish it on anybody, right? That they encounter the Darth Vader, but that influence can be so significant. So you've talked about your dad. What about for you guys? Like, who's been a significant, what's one person? Because for the sake of time, we could probably talk all day just about this, but what's one person that's been a big influence for you?
I would say my grandmother. I just admired her zest for life so much. And even after her passing, she's been gone for 12 years now, but I still feel very connected to her. I still visit her gravesite often, and I just sit and just talk with her and stuff. She helped me through a tremendous amount of adversity when I was going through my divorce and separation. And so she would definitely be one who's influenced my life.
Wow. And what would be one piece of advice that she gave you that's been a game changer for you?
Oh gosh, she used to give me give me so much advice. One thing that she used to say is always smile because the world is always smiling back at you.
I think I've heard you say that more than once. Now I know where it comes from. That's powerful. What about you?
For me, it's John, my stepdad, I think. And in some ways, in combination with my mom, John was just very quiet and calm and really designed a life first person I saw design a life that he really wanted. And so, he was working from home when nobody was working from home. He was going to meetings in Birkenstocks when nobody would dream of not being in a suit. He was, my mom was able to retire early. They were traveling. So they really showed me through more actions. Just this great life that they had built together. And so for me, that's just the power of influence there is not always in what he said, it's in what he didn't say, and it's by his actions and what he did.
Yeah. So it wasn't so much the advice, it's the way he lived his life.
Exactly.
Yeah,
100%.
You talked about your dad. I would say for me, certainly my dad was a major influence, but the human being that's probably influenced me the most is Jim Harrington. And I've talked about Jim more than once. He's
been on the show.
He's been on the show. He did a couple episodes with us. He works with our team now. He's like a coach to our team. He's like a second dad to me. And I would say the same. He's given me so much useful advice. He's probably the most genuine human being I've ever met, and the wisest man or person I've ever met.
Yeah, next to me.
Right. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
But I often say of Jim, if I can be half the coach that he is, I'll be doing really, really well. But again, it's not so much what he has said to me over the years. It's his way of being, his right. And, but I do know the one thing that he taught me, he kept saying over and over again, especially during the period when I was getting divorced and I was in a really rough spot. I talk about that on episode number 3. This is now episode 80, that's 77 shows ago. Going down to see him when I was in a really rough place. He invited me to come and he just took me into his home and he just kept reminding me, you're going to be okay, Eric. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And so it's even now in moments where I'm struggling or I'm going through a hard time, I can hear that voice. You're
that's
going to be
powerful.
okay. Yeah.
You know what? It's really interesting. And this just kind of hit me around with Jim, because when you talk about that, if I could only be, half the coach that he is, and I think you are incredibly capable coach, right up there with somebody like Jim. You've never, as much as he's influenced you, you've never tried to be a Jim 2.0,
no.
Right? Like your personalities, your style, your delivery of how you bring stuff to the table.
He's a lot more charismatic than I am.
Yeah, no, but it couldn't be further, right? Like and one of the things that as much as he's influenced you and influenced your life, you never then tried to shift out of the authenticity of who you are to being, I gotta, how would Jim do this? I'm going to do it the same way, which is what oftentimes people do is they look at the people that have influenced and think, I need to be more like them. No, you need to be more like you. Embrace the spirit of them. But I love that, because when you said that, I was like, man, yeah, like you bring out a lot of the characteristics of Jim without trying to be Jim.
Right. And I think that's when we think of the kinds of influences we want to have, we talk about the influences that we've had. That's the purpose of this exercise, this conversation. Yeah. But as we're looking perhaps for other mentors or influences in our lives, I think it's to surround ourselves with people who let us be exactly who we are. Right. I think it's Brene Brown talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging.
Yeah.
Most people try to fit in, live their whole lives trying to fit in. And to fit in, you're often having to be someone you're not so that you fit into the crowd. Yeah. True belonging is where people just accept you as you are, as your authentic self. If you could send, we're going to shift gears here just for time, but if you could send a message, I know John's no longer with us, right? Is your grandmother still no longer with us? I know your dad's not here. Jim's still around, but if you were able to send a message to those influencers, what would it be?
I mean, thank you. I mean, I think like that's the primary message. It's just thank you for just being. I think for me in that essence was just showing me that there's a way and a path, and it's having that sort of positivity that's, not always meaning they're always positive. But for me, John was a positive role model. That was like a great experience to have someone in my life who was male, right, who I looked up to. So just thank you. Like, thank you for being you and for showing up and being consistent and showing me that there's a different way to go after what you want, but not insisting that's the way to go.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Kate summed it up beautifully.
Yeah, thank you. I would say the same. And I think, for those of you watching the show, if your influencers, the folks that you really looked up to are still around, make sure maybe perhaps pause the show right now and send them a note and thank them for their contribution to your life. I think most of us go through life unaware of the positive impact we may be having on others, and we lose sight of that. And so taking time to honor them while you still can, I think is so powerful.
And let me jump in because I want to answer that question, and it's different because it's a different answer. And I think this will be helpful for some people that are listening that would be like me, where somebody who has influenced your life hasn't been that person who has maybe been where there's no place where I could say with genuineness, thank you to my dad.
Right.
That just wasn't the relationship we had. But what came to mind when you asked that question is I understand you.
Oh.
And the notion of when I look at my dad and what he brought to the table, he died an alcoholic. He died, hiding, on the run from the police. Like he was, in hiding, all of this stuff. And the potential he had to be something more. He had everything there. He wasn't able to find that void, to put it all together. He wasn't able to put the pieces together. And for a lot of years, I could have looked at him and said, you failed me, or all of those things. Where I go from it today is to be able to say, I understand. You did what you could with the limitations of what you understood.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I can be free with that. And maybe for some of you, when you're looking at an influencer in your life who is negative, you're not going to say thank you, but maybe there's a different way to frame that, to reframe it in your mind so that, again, you can reclaim that past and take ownership over it because it's not holding you back, because you're able to release what that person was for you.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think, as you were saying that, when we talk about reclaiming our story, resetting our relationship to our past, it's not about making it all make sense.
No.
Because I don't think you can. There's going to be some things that we may never resolve and are likely never going to resolve. But can you make peace with it?
Yeah.
And can you say thank you? Can you say, I understand? Can you draw more of that into your life now, the good that it's left you, and how it's transformed you to really leverage it to live more in the now and build a life you've always dreamed of? Let's shift gears. Let's talk about lessons learned in hardship, shall we? I mean, we've all been through trials and tribulations. In my former life, there's, I think in the book of Isaiah, it's called the furnace of affliction, in the good book, right? We've all been through those times where we would never want to relive it. And yet we've come through on the other side, and maybe not immediately. Sometimes there's lag between the hardship and when the lesson is actually learned. But lessons are learned. And how have your challenges been a source of strength and learning? And why is it important to get present to them and reflect on them?
Yeah, I think you just nailed it on the timing. I think when you're in it, you can't see the forest through the trees.
Yeah, it's hard.
Trees through the forest? I think I got that
Forest for the trees.
Forest through the...
Is there
You can't
trees
see the
in the
forest
forest? Maybe there's no trees in the
If
forest.
a tree falls and you're
Did you hear it?
doesn't make any noise.
It is forest through for the trees.
So now that we ruined that analogy for all of our listeners.
I thought it was beautiful.
I thought it was
Thank
great.
you.
Brought tears to my
Wonderful.
glass
Thank
eye.
you.
Yeah.
Now I have completely lost my train. No, but I think when you're in it, you just cannot see it. And I think it is afterwards, when you've gone through something difficult and a challenge, afterwards is when you can have the perspective. I think when you're in it, I'm not saying you can't see it, but you might see it very clouded or very in that space. I think it's afterwards where you can look back.
Once the dust settles a little bit.
There's things you can I think a John passing away is not a challenge. It's not the word I would use, but when John died, when I'm in it, that emotion is just that's grief. It's a million one emotions all in one. But afterwards, can you find what can you take away, right? So when I look back at all the fond memories, all the great times we have, and that I find so much joy in peace in. So I wouldn't want to repeat the challenge, and death is a weird association with the word challenge, but afterwards when you come out of it, like the strength I had, the resilience, the ability to truly feel deep emotion that I didn't know I could feel. You can take away good from a really difficult situation.
I agree with you though. A lot of times you can't see it
when
in
you're
the moment. Right. You
No.
can't see it when you're in it. It's very cloudy. But recognizing that journey and that reflection on it, hindsight, is what builds resilience.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say, like, how do I become more resilient?
Totally.
I have such a hard time dealing with resilience and adversity. But a lot of it is recognizing that that's the only way to grow out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Nothing grows in your comfort zone.
That's
and,
right.
by recognizing that, and then take a look at what your reaction and your attitude is around that.
Totally.
That determines how your story will develop.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
forget exactly how she said it. Maybe you ladies might remember this. Ray, who we had on the had an episode with Ray when not that long ago, and she talked about there's one moment in that episode where she said, "I wouldn't want to go back. I don't want to change anything in my past because it's made me who I am today." Right?
100%.
And I think there's so much truth to that.
Yeah.
People sometimes will say to me, like, do you wish you had, that Katie didn't, do you wish Katie was with you? And do you ever think about what Katie would be like if, she was now 22, 23 years old? And of course I think about that. And yes, I would love to have her with me, but I wouldn't change them. If it meant sacrificing one, we wouldn't have had Remy. If Katie had lived, we wouldn't have had a third child. That wasn't in the plans.
Right.
So I look at it and go, I'm so grateful for Remy in my life. I'm so grateful for all of what I learned through those hardships and those trials and all of that. So in that context, again, it's these are not black and white answers.
No.
In that context, absolutely. I wouldn't change a thing about all of the hardships I've gone through because I couldn't be who I am today without them.
Yeah.
100%.
I agree.
100%. And I think it's really how you approach it and the mindset you have around, we talk about the victim mindset where life is happening to me. And, there's a lot of complaining, a lot of moaning, a lot of like, it's not my fault and there's nothing I can do. And, I think we all fall below the line there, from time to time. Like we all go there, right? Feel sorry for ourselves and look at things. But when we talk about reclaiming our story, it's looking at those moments, to your point, to everything you guys have said, like, and saying, how has that changed me? How has that shaped who I am? And like reverse mentors, we talked about the Darth Vaders are our key influencers. There's also moments where, we didn't respond so well. And that the moment made us worse for a little while. And we, instead of becoming better, maybe we went bitter and spiteful and whatever else, and maybe made some poor choices. Yeah. But instead of beating ourselves up with that information, like I know I often do, especially over certain things that have happened in my life and decisions that I've made, is to say, well, even that was part of the education. Even that was part of the lesson learned of shaping who I am, that I went down a certain path for a season. And when I look at that, that's not who I want to be. Well, when people are trying to choose a career or trying to change, like often they have to try different things. And I always encourage them and say, well, okay, so you just figured out something else you don't want to do. That's great. It's one less on the list. But we have a hard time doing that sometimes with our past, right? We tend to just beat ourselves up over it. How do you guys like deliberately leverage the lessons learned from your harder moments in the past to navigate current challenges now?
Right away when you say that, I think
bottle of wine.
Bottle of wine.
No.
Right away when you mention that, I think about my accident in 2018 because it's just such a pivotal moment in my life.
Yeah.
And the one lesson and the one thing that I think is sometimes I'll look at myself and be like, you're a strong motherfucker because you got through it.
Right.
And there were moments when I didn't know if I was going to live. And I always think back to a quote that resonates with me. And that's, if the fire inside you burns brighter than the fire around you, you will always survive.
Oh, I love that.
That's a great one.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I think similarly when Zach was in the hospital,
Yeah.
for me, I don't think like in it, we talk about forest to the trees to the forest, whatever. When I was in it,
We're talking about trees, forests, and plants.
But when I was in
Darth
it,
Vader.
my inner critic was on fire. When I was in it, I failed. I was a horrible parent. Like it was, and afterwards, with a lot of therapy, was like, wow, like I showed up so strong in that moment, and I did everything I could to help my son along the way. So you talk about in the moment not being able to see it, but knowing I had that much strength and resilience and power to get through that afterwards.
Yeah.
I love
Powerful.
I back in my preacher days, I went through a phase.
Back in my day.
Back in no, you're not even close. Back in my day.
Okay, old man.
Steve's ears just pierced from the sound of that. Steve,
That was booming.
hey. Back in my preacher days, I went through a phase where I would use movie clips in sermons. Right, a lot of
I
guys
did
were
the
doing
same,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of guys were doing that. And all that's going through my head right now when it comes to the lessons learned, and I can hear his voice and doing it, everything like that. But it is the lesson, and that was just keep breathing. And it's from the movie Castaway. Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And it's near the end of the movie, and he's back.
What's the name of the
now.
volleyball again?
Wilson.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he's now back. He's now back on. Been rest. Everything's good. If I'm spoiling the movie for you, fuck you. It's like 100 years old.
He doesn't really mean that.
Yeah,
folks.
It's near the end of the movie, and he's having this scene where he's talking. I can't even remember who he's talking to. I think he's talking to the Helen Hunt character. Yeah. Anyway, but he's talking about how did he survive for all of those years, and that's the language he used. And I remember it was so impactful that I used it. I've used that clip in sermons. Is just keep breathing, and I know for me through the hardships and the challenges that I've faced, and the trials and the situations that I've gone through. And to this today, when I'm feeling it, when I'm burdened, I go back to that notion of just keep breathing.
I love that, brother. Love that. So good. Two things, a quick before we shift gears, because again, we got lots still to cover here. And I'm glad we're unpacking this because I think there's a lot of richness here that we can revisit in future shows. One, growth was once explained to me, like people, sometimes we go through hardship and then we go through another hardship and we feel like we've not learned anything, right? How many times have you even perhaps said to yourself, I feel like I'm just going around in circles? And right, like I just feel like I'm right back where I started, right? I don't think there's been any growth. And the reality is, if you're learning even just a little bit, you may have circled around, but you're circling a mountain. And every time you circle, you're at a slightly higher elevation. And so with each round, even though it feels like you've come back to point zero, you haven't. You're just a little bit higher up. And the higher up you go, the greater the visibility, the greater the view, the greater the perspective. Yeah. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that.
I love that.
I had a conversation this week with a great new client of mine. He's a multi-millionaire, been very successful in the construction world. And he was talking about, I asked him how his stress level was. And he says pretty high. I said, to a scale of 1 to 10, he says, 7. And he said it kind of, I was like, it's probably higher.
Yeah.
How he said it. Turns out there's a side project that he's working on outside of his primary business, and it looks like it's going to be a loss of several $1 million. It's the biggest loss he's ever encountered, and he's navigating it with a few other businessmen that he's doing this with, and I could tell it's really weighing heavy on him. And he's like, this is the first time I've never faced something like this before. I'm not quite sure what to do. We're talking here a really savvy, successful individual who's facing off with some pretty high stake losses, right, from this business venture gone bad. And so I just started to ask him, I said, so how many times have you faced off with something difficult in your life and navigated through it? And he starts to think and I said, how many times have you managed to turn it around? And how many times have you, and all of a sudden it was like he got present, and his entire spirit changed in that moment. He got present. This is not my first rodeo. He said, okay, so this challenge is new, but I've been here before. And I've been here many times and successfully navigated through. And the times that I didn't, I learned from them. So that wasn't a failure either. I think we tend to for me, what I try, and this was, it was Ray Dalio who would say connecting the dots is so important for us to do. Yeah. And he said to remind yourself, the next time you face a challenge, just remind yourself, this is just another one of those. I have been here before, and I've got a long track record of overcoming hardship, and this won't be any different. It's David and Goliath, David facing off first with the bear, then the lion, finally the giant, and he faces the giant and says, hey man, you're just another one of those, right?
I think there's so much truth. When we first started dating, we were first having conversations. I don't know if you remember this, but I would talk about the notion of, well, you would talk about something that was going on, and then you would use the, FML. Right. And as a lot of people do, right? Yeah. People will always is FML, fuck my life. That's just so typical FML. And I hate that phrase. Like that, like to me, it's like, what? No. Like why, who puts that out in the universe, and who looks at their past that way? And that's how many people do, right? They look at it and go, oh, look, there's another situation. Oh, there's another situation. FML.
Right.
Instead of seeing it the way that you're seeing it, going, oh, there's another situation. Good thing I've already gone through a whole bunch of these because now I know how to handle that.
Right.
And it's all in how you change perspective,
100%. How
you see things differently to be able to now face whatever challenge it is that you can look and say, I've already dealt with the bear. You're just another one of those. I love that one of those.
It's again the difference between life is happening to me or life is happening for me, right?
Or this too shall pass. One of my favorites. This too shall pass.
Yeah.
It's not permanent. This too shall pass.
100%. 100%. Let's talk about signature strengths, which is the third part of this quadrant, which when you think of, again, the influencers who have left their mark and helped shape your narrative, the lessons that you've learned in hardship, and now the strengths that have developed in your life as a result. How do you sharpen? What is it? As iron sharpens iron, right? You can't sharpen it without rubbing it against something that's even harder. And so hardship has that, gives us gifts. It leaves us with strengths, signature strengths that often go unrecognized. When you look at your narrative to date and you look back into your past, what would you say maybe one or two of those signature strengths are, and how do they serve you now?
I know for me, this would be an easy one: compassion and empathy. It's certainly probably more than anything. That's what I hear people say to me when I'm coaching clients. One of the things I provide such a safe space for them to get vulnerable and real with what their struggles are, to get to the heart of what really matters. And I know that those strengths, the ability to be able to both show compassion to others, as well as to be able to empathize with where they are, comes out of the experiences that I've had in my past.
I love that. Yeah. I did a ton of self-reflection. Maybe because I used FML all the time, which apparently I'm just finding out now that I did.
Wow, live on the show.
Awkward.
The next episode will be a group therapy session.
Apparently.
Robin Wendy.
But no, I did a ton of self-reflection, a lot of time to recognize what my qualities and my talents were and not what everybody else thought that I should be doing or what society thought I should be doing. And I really started to get present with who and what I wanted to align myself with. And that, I think, in turn has transformed into one of my strengths.
Love that.
Love that. That's good.
For me, it's curiosity. Curiosity is at the core of everything without me knowing it. I think it's how I'm wired. I was actually listening to a podcast with Oprah and Brian Grazer, producer, and he wrote a book called A Curious Mind, which I haven't read, which I now want to read. But he talks about how he was a curious kid and he didn't do well in school. And he ends up writing this book later called A Curious Mind. And I don't know over how many years, but he spent all these years just being curious and having curious conversation. So he'd meet with people and interview like very sort of, jarring individuals. Some were, politicians or just very famous or not. And he comes at it with curiosity. So it could be someone who's very, I'm not going to say like not a nice person, put it that way. Yeah. But he goes in it with curiosity versus any type of formed opinion before he goes in to talk to them. He's like, get curious. He's like, get curious about the person ahead of you at the grocery store. If you get curious about the person you just accidentally bumped into, imagine what could happen if you go in with openness and curiosity. So it really hit me where I was like, curiosity is one of those ones for me that has literally guided me my whole life.
I love that.
Yeah. And for me, curiosity is actually one of my core values, personal core values. And
you guys should get together.
We should probably hang out more. Yeah. What are you doing tonight? But this is where sometimes you might go, well, what's the difference between a strength? What's the difference between a value? And I don't think that matters to be able to tell the difference. Many folks, we've been getting such amazing feedback from the 15-day challenge where people are getting clear on the kind of life they want to design. Why I think anyone who's doing the challenge or is considering doing the challenge might consider reflecting on some of the stuff we're talking about now. Consider this like the prep work. You're doing like the homework to get ready for the real deal, because when you look to your strengths that have emerged, some of those will be values that you now hold very, very dear, and will make that work a little bit easier. I would say for me, like when we talk about signature strengths, that oftentimes it comes out of the hardships that you've faced and flipping the script a little bit. My life choices, my story has been filled with many times having to reinvent myself, and I've talked about that openly on the show on many occasions, but many times that meant a severing of the community that I was a part of. I don't know how many times I've had to start from scratch and lose pretty much my not entire, but most of my community that I'd grown to really love. So loneliness has been a friend, an ally, a part of my life for a very long time, even from when I was young. I talked about it on the show that you and I did on being a real man, but the lone wolf episode. I'm very familiar with what it means to be a lonely wolf. But flipping the script is more and more what has loneliness developed in me, and what it has given me is an incredible resilience to face life head on, to not feel limited by the crowd, right? A sense of being able to follow my heart without holding back, and that's by its nature. By my nature, I'm a collaborator. I want to do everything in community. But what I've come to realize is the strength that has given me. So oftentimes, again, when we talk about identifying those signature strengths, we don't want to go looking where it hurts, because we try to avoid that stuff. But often in that pain, there are tremendous gifts that the universe has given you and that you have forged in hardship, in whatever you're facing, that could be leveraged even further if they were actually recognized, right? So much more we could say about that, but I want to shift gears to the last one, if we might. Okay. I know we're flying here, guys, but we want to talk about learning to let go. And when we talk about learning to let go here, we're talking about letting go of the bad scripts or the unhealthy scripts or beliefs that we have adopted over time that have been shaped by our past. And again, probably the most significant time frame for any of us for those beliefs to be formed was our family of origin, our first formation. But then early adulthood, especially our early career days or work days, like professional life days, that also has a very significant impact on how we see ourselves and see the world. What's your journey been like in terms of uncovering, discerning unhealthy scripts and reshaping them so that you're more mindful of the beliefs that you're carrying around with you now? Who wants to handle that one first?
Yeah, wow.
I think it should be Rob.
I think so too.
I think so too.
He looks ready.
No, it's I go back to the word I used at the beginning, empowering, right? It's letting go of those scripts, and I appreciate what you said there, because I don't know if we ever truly let go of them. We rewrite them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
the brain science would say that the neural pathway that original belief was it will always remain.
Well, it's there,
but
and
you form a new one.
You create a new one, but if you allow the old one, the synapse, it can bounce back there, right? So, but as that's where I go back to why I look at my past and that's what comes to mind is the empowering of it, is because, even when I talk about the trials and the things that I went through, in the moment they didn't. In fact, one of my superscripts is everyone I care about leaves.
Right.
And so
I shared that one in common, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so for me, the rewriting of that is the empowering of it, to be able to now look at it and go, no, that's not true at all. In fact, I can love deeply and have this incredible experience. In this case, using Wendy as this example, I can love deeply. I can love purely. I can embrace all of that because I've rewritten that script. I can come into, there's no one that I share openly more my pain or when I'm in those moments reflecting. Wendy's great at, she knows, it's, coming up Katie's birthday. Oh, it's Katie's birthday. How you do? Just having conversations. Tell me a bit about her, whatever that. So to embrace all of that, the empowering of it is, there's such a beautiful opportunity when we not let go but rewrite those scripts of the past.
Yeah,
powerful.
It's freeing.
Yeah.
Like it's just that ability to kind of let go and not feel so tied to it, and not feeling the need to. It's like stop having to prove in that moment that, and just start being, right, and living in that moment. It's freeing. It really is. You get to that place where you just feel lighter somehow.
Well, you show up differently, don't you? Like you
do.
We talk about how our past continues to influence us, right? And when we don't do the work, and again, folks, we're not suggesting you're going to make sense of everything.
No.
And there's periods of your life, or perhaps for some of us here around the table, I know there's been some traumatic stuff that we've gone through, and no doubt folks that are watching the show have experienced trauma as well. And trauma is a whole different ball of wax, and you often need help. It's often overcoming trauma, depending on the severity of it, is not something you can do on your own. You typically need help, and often that's the help of a therapist or a coach who can really help you do that work. But it's getting really present again to how are those strings still pulling? Yeah, right. Like still, it's like a puppet on a strings to your past, and you're showing up differently now because those things are still impacting you. And I remember you talk about not having to prove anything. I was proven shit all the time. I was trying to prove to myself that I was a good person. And so was it really me showing up? Well, but there were moments, but a lot of times it was this pretend me that was showing up to try to get that affirmation or recognition that I'm okay. And no matter how hard I tried, I never got enough of that to meet that gaping hole in my heart, because that's a hole I had to fill. Nobody else could fill it for me.
Yeah. I watched a YouTube video. This was years and years ago, and and sometimes I still go back and watch it. And it was done by Gloria Mayfield Banks, and she's very big in the network marketing space, but I always admired her authenticity. And she said everything and everyone in life, whether it be events, people, places, things, are either bricks or flowers. Flowers are light and are beautiful and allow you to enjoy the moment. Bricks are heavy and cumbersome and they weigh you down. And she said, don't carry the bricks. And I always remembered that.
Such a great vision.
I always remembered that. And it's is it a brick or is it a flower? And what do I want to carry?
Right.
And how do I want to carry it?
Right. Wow. So good. What advice? I mean, I know we've talked about this on other shows about the stories we tell ourselves and scripts that hold us back and that can ruin our lives and run our lives. Quickly here, maybe one bit of advice from each of you. What are simple steps a person might take to begin to get present to those irrational beliefs that we have about ourselves, and how to begin to build healthier ones?
Yeah, I'm pen to paper. I say this all the time, but write it down. Write down your limiting beliefs. And I'm a big believer in affirmations. I talk about it all the time on the show. Yeah. Write it down. Write the negative belief, that limiting belief down, and create a positive statement around it. I would say, and I get to, but write an I am, right? Whatever works for you, and switch the language and start saying the positive version that counteracts your limiting belief. Like, I am enough. Yeah. I am worthy. just some of the basics, when you start using that language and affirming the opposite of this belief, it can hold a ton of power for change.
Literally rewire the brain.
Literally rewire the brain.
Well, and I love that because that is like your mind listens to everything you tell it. And some people will listen to this and think, well, but that's, that almost seems too easy or too good to be true. Well, it's easy to do, but it's easier not to do. And that's why a lot of people choose not to do it. And I agree with you so much, Kate, around rewiring the brain. And that all ties into awareness because what you focus on, you find. What you focus on, you become.
I'm going to steal something, a little bit of what you said near the beginning of the show. And I was just thinking of it there. Stop believing that the pen is in anyone else's hand but yours.
Right.
The pen is in your hand.
Yeah.
You are the one that gets to write this.
Yeah.
No one else does it for you. No one else has the control. Nobody else has the power to write the script for you unless you give it to them.
100%.
And so you have the pen in your hand and you can write whatever script you want to write. So write it.
Wow. That's so good, guys. And I'm looking forward to future conversations. We've the next part of Quadrant we'll explore in a future show is getting radically present and living in the moment and in the now. And what are the things that help you do that? And what are the things that hold you back? But as we wrap up lightning round here, what's one final word of advice for any of our listeners that are saying, it's time for me to reclaim my story. It's time for me to reset my relationship to my past. What's a word of advice you would leave our listeners with today?
Just take action. Start.
Yeah.
Period. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Just like start.
Yeah.
Start. I'm going to say it again.
Start. You know what?
But I'm serious. I really am.
I love that. I love that. And you're
that.
absolutely right. Like there's so much advice that we can give, but I think all of us could agree. It's just fucking do it. Just start.
Take ownership.
Do it.
Take ownership.
Yes. Stop getting ready to get ready.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
All the time, right?
Yeah.
We get sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's so good. I love how passionate you just got there, brother. That's awesome.
Well, no, because it's your. I love her passion.
Just like
you got me all passionate. It's like just do it.
Just do it.
Well, and by doing, sorry, Eric, by doing it, that allows you to put deposits. So just like your money compounds over time, the same thing is wired to your brain. Put deposits in your confidence bank every day. And the only way to do that is by doing something different. I just said to my daughter the other week, nothing changes if nothing changes. If you're doing the same thing over and over and you're not getting results or you're still feeling like a hamster spinning in a wheel, what are you not doing?
Yeah.
What are you going to do different that's going to allow you to start something different?
Yeah. I would say yes to all of that. Just start. And starting means choose mindfully. What influences, what lessons, what strengths, what beliefs you live with now. Sever the ties. Start severing the ties with the shit that holds you back and cement the truths that set you free. Guys, what a great conversation.
What a great conversation. Love that.
Folks, we're so glad you've joined us for today's show. We really hope that you benefited from it. And there's more to come on this subject. The Quadrant Model is something that's continuing to unfold as part of the Living Richly Nation. And so we invite you to be part of it. As always, we encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to the show. Make sure you get the word out. We appreciate every shout out that we get. It helps us spread the news and get this message out to more people. And we're excited to just continue to watch explosive growth on our YouTube channel and in our exclusive Facebook group called the Living Richly Nation. You can find out about all those things on our website at livingrichly.me, including how to sign up for our new free online experience called the 15-Day Life Vision Challenge, which is really quadrant number 2, which we talked about in episode 76. So you can go back just a couple shows and see that. It's been getting rave reviews. People are calling it life-changing, truly inspirational, a real game changer. So we encourage you to sign up for that and experience it for yourself. Until next week, keep living your best life.